you are well, and I also hope that you are having an amazing day so far. So, for today, we will be doing our grade 3 English lesson on adjectives and adverbs. So, we'll be doing our grade 3 English lesson on adjectives and adverbs. And before we start with our lesson on adjectives and adverbs, we are going to log into a+students.ca because that is where we will be doing our lessons. So a+students.ca. So whenever you want to go back and you want to recap, then you can just go to a+students.ca. Can go to the specific chapter, which is adjectives and adverbs, grade 3. And our lessons that we are focusing on today is to choose between adjectives and adverbs and is the word adjective or adverb. So adjectives and adverbs, hey? An adjective, it is a word that basically tells us about the noun. So we basically can say that adjectives, they describe the noun. So it's a word that would tell us about the noun. So it is more like describing the noun. So it's more like describing the noun. Let's say adjectives. So adjectives describe the noun, describes the noun, right? So it tells us about the noun or describes the noun. So with adjectives, they will either tell us how many, right? Or they will tell us what kind, right? So that is adjectives. It's either they'll ask you how many, or they'll tell you how many, or what kind. So how many, meaning that it will maybe say um there's a lot of stars in the sky, 3 stars, 10 stars in the sky. There are 2 boys. So that is basically how you would describe an adjective, would try to describe a noun, sorry, based on how many. Also, what kind? Adjectives that tells us what kind, right? So then it will also like maybe say things like so if it tells you what kind, and then it can maybe say things like, let's say, the girl has a beautiful dress. So the girl has a beautiful dress, right? So beautiful tells us what kind of dress she has. Or she has we can say a red dress. So what kind of dress does she have? She's got a beautiful dress, she's got a red dress, and that basically tells us what kind. With how many, we said how many can be things like there are 3 apples, or there are 3 dogs, 3 dogs, or 3 boys, right? Or 3 stars. But it is basically telling us how many of that things there is. And then here, like for example, beautiful or red, it tells us what kind. All right. So basically, an adjective is a word that tells us about a noun, and the adjectives will tell us what kind and how many, right? And then we have adverbs. So now we have adverbs. So we have adjectives and now we have adverbs, right? And an adverb is a word that tells us about the verb, right? So the same as almost describing the verb, but it tells us about the verb, right? So it basically it tells us how the action is being done. So adverbs often show or tell us how, or they tell us when, or they'll even tell us where, right? So for example, if an adjective tells us how, and then we will end in ly, right? So it's like quickly, hurriedly, happily, right? So that is basically adjectives that tells us how, quickly, hurriedly, happily, and so on. So Grace ran quickly, and the word quickly, it tells us how, because now you're asking yourself like, how did Grace run? She ran quickly, right? So basically, yeah, it tells us how Grace ran. And most adjectives that tells us how, they end in ly, right? So it ends in ly. But it's not all of the adjectives that ends in ly, right? Because some of the adjectives do not end in ly. Um, but then also you'll get adjectives that also end in ly. But that is, we will basically find out more about that when we go onto the tutorial page. And then we'll find out more about um, adjectives also that ends in ly. All right, so we are basically doing both adjectives and adverbs, right? And when it comes to an adjective and it comes to an adverb, right? Then both of these words, they basically tell us about something, right? Like for example, adjectives, they tell us or describe the noun, as well as, and then we have, sorry, adverbs that tell us or describes the verb, right? And a noun, right? A noun is basically, it tells us about it names a noun, it names a person, place, animal, an idea, right? So basically the adjective uh, describes or tells us about either the person, animal, place, or idea, right? And then an adverb, it tells us about the verb, or it tells us about an adjective, or it tells us about another adverb, right? And um when it comes to adjectives, right? It when it, okay, if we link an adverb to a verb is a doing word, right? So a verb is a doing word. So adverbs, they basically tell us how the action is being done. So it tells us how the action is being done. It tells us when the action is being done, or it tells us where the action is being done. So now if we look at examples of adjectives as well as adverbs. So, like if we look at the differences between an adjective and an adverb, this is us basically like comparing. So with adjectives, right? If it tells us about the kids, right, then it will say happy kids, right? So what kind of kids? They are happy kids. But now, if we an adverb, right, to tell us about, for example, playing, right? Then we will maybe say the kids are playing happily, right? So how are the kids playing? Happily, right? And here it is almost like what kind of kids? Even here, smooth rock. It's telling us about the rock. The rock is smooth, right? The same with night. It's either a very cold night, it's a warm night, it's a good night, it's a bad night. It's you telling us about the night. The same with the dress. We can either say it's a casual dress, it's a rare dress, it's a beautiful dress, it's a floral dress, it's a summer dress, right? It's you telling us about the dress, or it basically describes the dress, or tells us what kind of dress. Um, and in the meeting, it's like somebody asking you, how was the meeting? And then you can say, it was a quick meeting, it was a long meeting, it was a boring meeting. So that is how you describe or tell us about a specific thing, like a noun, which is the meeting in that sense. Then once again by adverbs, right? Running smoothly, right? So basically, how are you running, or how has the running been? So you can just say, no, like we were running smoothly, right? I'm eating well. Working efficiently. How were you working? I was working efficiently. I was very productive. So that is something that you can maybe say. Dressing casually, right? Casually. That is how I am dressing for the occasion, because we're going to the park. So I am just dressing casually. Talking quickly, right? So I'm talking quickly so that I get all of the content in before the lesson is done. So that is talking quickly, right? And then waiting hopefully, right? Meaning that I am hopeful that somebody is going to come, or I'm hopeful that um, we are going to make it to the end of the week, or something like that, right? So that is but a few examples of adjectives that tells us about the noun, and adverbs that basically tells us about a verb. So now we're going to our lessons on aplusstudents.ca. And our lessons on aplusstudents.ca, you are going to log in with your username and password. And then you're going to choose arts, grade 3, and then you're going to scroll down up until you get to the, the chapter of adjectives and adverbs. All right, so once we are by the chapter of adjectives and adverbs, and then we're going to click on the first lesson that says choose between adjectives and adverbs. Choose between adjectives and adverbs. Okay, and then once again, it just says an adjective is a word that tells us about the noun. And also, like we said, it's like describing the noun. And adjectives, they often tell us what kind, and they tell us how many, right? And earlier on, we also made an example of Jody saw 3 stars, right? And 3 tells us how many stars Jody saw. And then an adverb is a word that tells a verb. And adverbs often tells us how, it tells us when, or it tells us where. For example, Grace ran quickly, right? The adverb tells us how she ran. She ran quickly. And usually adverbs that ends in ly, they basically tell us how, right? But not all words that ends in ly is only an adverb, right? some words that end in ly can also be an adjective. For example, she arrives soon, right? Soon is an adverb that doesn't end in ly, right? And of course, it does not tell us how, for example. But then if we look also at the word friendly, friendly, it basically tells us how or what kind of dog it is, right? So Fred has a friendly dog. That does not necessarily mean that friendly, because it ends in ly, is adverb. Because remember, you need to ask yourself, what is being described or what is it telling us about? So, for example, dog. Dog is a noun, right? So, dog is a noun, which means that friendly, it tells us about the noun. So, friendly tells us about the noun. So, this is an adjective. So, when it comes to identifying either adjectives or adverbs, right? You need to be able to first identify the verb or the noun. Because once you identify the verb or the noun, then you'll be able to see what is there now being described or what are they telling us about. Are they telling us about the noun or are they telling us about the verb? And then you'll be able to identify, are they asking us what kind, or they're asking us how many, or are they asking us or they're telling us how, when, or where. All right, so now we're going to look at a few um, example of exercises or activities or questions. We need to insert the correct missing verb in the sentence. She read. We need to fill in something there. Read all the directions for building the model. Basically, it's directions that she had to read. So they're saying that she carefully read the directions. So she carefully read the directions, which means that read, what is read? Is read a verb or is read a noun? Read. If you look at the word read, is read a verb or is read a noun? So read is basically a verb, right? So it is a verb. So basically, carefully is an adverb that tells us how. That tells us how we read the directions, or how she read the directions. So we can basically say how she read the directions. All right. We go into the next one. Look, and you'll see the directions at the bottom of the page. In order for you to see the bottom of the page, you need to look closely. Closely, which means that look is a verb. Closely is an adverb, right? So how should I look? You should look closely. So this is an adverb that tells us how you need to look. You need to look closely at the bottom of the page in order to see the directions. Will Mrs. Lee be driving to work at the time? So this is at the usual time. So will Mrs. Lee be driving to work at the usual time? And this is basically an adverb, right? It tells us how often she will be driving to work. She'll be driving to work, let's say when, basically. She'll be driving to work her usual time. All right, so now we're going on to our test. We're going to do a test now on choosing between and adverbs. So we're going to insert the correct missing verb in the sentence. Mrs. Pittman lifted the glass bowl onto the top shelf. So lifted is lifted firstly a verb or a noun, right? So they're saying we need to insert the correct missing verb, right? So this is a verb, so we need to identify an adverb. So is it carefully lifted the glass or careful lifted the glass bowl? We need to choose the correct one. So Mrs. Pittman is carefully lifted the glass bowl onto the top shelf, or Mrs. Pittman careful lifted the glass bowl onto the top shelf. So we need to choose one of the words. All right, so if we basically choose the correct verb, then we can say she carefully lifted the glass bowl onto the top shelf. So carefully. So Mrs. Pittman carefully lifted the glass bowl onto the top shelf. And it tells us how she lifted the glass bowl. Katie and Sandra, we need to insert the correct verb, the missing verb. So Katie and Sandra, is it neat? Packed their clothes for their vacation in Arizona, or neatly packed their clothes in Arizona? So Katie and Sandra packed their clothes for their vacation. Did they pack it neat or did they pack it neatly? Neat or neatly? So it tells us how they pack their clothes. An adverb. All right, so if we choose the correct adverb, right, and then we can say she neatly or they neatly pack their clothes. Neatly pack their clothes. And neatly tells us about the verb. Will Mrs. Lee be driving to work at the, is it usually time or at the usual time? Usually time or usual time? So we need to select the correct missing verb. And if we choose the correct missing verb, then we will say the usual time. My father's, we need to choose the missing verb. My father's, is it fresh bread or freshly bread, tasted delicious with the homemade soup? So my father's, is it fresh bread, tasted delicious with the homemade soup, or freshly bread, tasted delicious with the homemade soup? So we need to choose one of the words. Fresh bread or freshly bread. All right, so someone says we must say fresh bread. Let's choose fresh bread. And it is fresh bread, right? That tastes delicious. So well done. Well done. All right, so that is it for our lesson on choosing between adjectives and adverb. So we're now going on to, is the word adjective or adverb, right? We are going to identify now if the word is either an adjective or if the word is an adverb. And remember, we said that a word that is either adjective or an adverb, right? An adverb, it tells us about the noun. So sometimes it is rather best to first identify the noun or to identify the verb, right, in order to know if this is an adjective or if it's an adverb. Then you'll be able to ask yourself, okay, so if it's an adjective, is it telling me what kind or telling me how many? Or if it's an adverb, is it telling me how, when, or where? So we need to identify, it says here, is the underlined word an adjective or an adverb? So now we need to identify if the word is an adjective or if the word is an adverb. The sudden storm brought the outdoor events to an end. So the outer storm, the sudden storm, the sudden storm brought the outdoor event to an end. Is this word sudden? Is it an adjective or an adverb? It's describing the storm. Is storm a noun or is storm a verb? So which means that sudden that describes storm, is it telling us about a noun or telling us about a verb? Meaning is it an adjective or an adverb? All right, so sudden storm, right? And sudden is an adjective. It's an adjective. And it tells us about the noun. It tells us about the noun, which is a storm. So it's an adjective. He never exercises and is in terrible shape. He never exercises and is in terrible shape. We need to identify if the word is an adjective or an adverb. Terrible shape. So we need to say if this is an adverb or an adjective. All right, so we can then say that it is an terrible shape is an adjective that tells us about the noun shape. So adjectives. All right, and then if we basically ask ourselves, is the underlined word an adjective or an adverb, right? The game stopped when someone suddenly got hurt. Suddenly got hurt. So the word suddenly, right? Is it telling us about the verb? Because got hurt. Is that a, if somebody gets hurt, is it an action or is it a noun, right? Or stopped, the game stopped, right? So basically, it is the whole sentence, it's telling us about an action, right? So suddenly will tell us about how the action happened, right? So suddenly the game stopped. So which means that suddenly is an adverb and it tells us about the verb. So this is an adverb, right? So the game stopped when someone suddenly got hurt. So they suddenly got hurt. So getting hurt is an action, right? So suddenly someone got hurt. So this is an adverb. And an adverb, it tells us about the verb, right? So an adverb can either tell us how the person got hurt, when the person got hurt, or where the person got hurt. So when did the person get hurt? This person suddenly got hurt, or how. So basically, this is telling us how the person got hurt. Suddenly, and it ends in ly. All right, so now we're going to our test to identify if the word is adjective or adverb. The sudden storm brought the outdoor events to an end. We need to say if the word sudden is either an adjective or if it's an adverb. So sudden. Is sudden an adjective or is sudden an adverb? It's telling us about the storm. The sudden storm brought the outdoor event to an end. Is this an adjective or is it an adverb? Sudden. All right, so we can say that sudden is an adjective. So it tells us about the calmness of the storm. Actually, the storm wasn't even calm. The woman quickly grabbed a sandwich after work. Quickly grabbed. Grabbed is a verb, right? So how did she grab it? She grabbed it quickly. So which means that is this an adjective? Quickly is an adjective, or is quickly an adverb? We need to choose one. So the woman quickly grabbed a sandwich after work. Quickly. All right, so if we choose if it is an adjective or an adverb, and then we can say that it is an adverb. It tells us how she grabbed the sandwich quickly, because grabbed is the verb. So adverb. The sad little puppy was happy to be rescued. The sad little puppy was happy to be rescued. Is this an adverb, sad, or is it an adverb? So sad is it an adjective or an adverb? Is it telling us about the puppy? Or what is it telling us about? So basically, the sad little puppy was happy to be rescued. It is an adjective and it tells us what kind of puppy it is. It is a sad little puppy. Tyler reads quietly for hours in his cozy bed. He reads. So reads is a verb. So quietly tells us how he's reading. So is it an adjective or is it an adverb? So quietly reads, which means that this is telling us how he reads, which means that this is an adverb. It tells us how he reads. And we're going to do one last one. The game stopped when someone suddenly got hurt. The game stopped when someone suddenly got hurt. Is the word suddenly an adjective or is suddenly an adverb? Is it telling us about the verb or is it telling us about a noun? Suddenly stopped. And if we choose the adjective or adverb, and then we can say suddenly is an adverb because it shows how he got hurt. All right, so we're going back to our whiteboard, right? All right, so this is basically just telling us about examples of how we identify adjectives and adverbs. Because with an adjective, right, it will basically tell us about the noun, right? So it's like saying she is quick. So what kind of person is this? She's a quick girl, right? She's quick, she's fast. But now she walks away quickly, right? So quickly, it tells us how she walked away, and that is an adverb. And that is where we'll be able to see the differences between an adjective as well as an adverb. All right, so now we're going to look at this activity in front of us, right? You're gonna have to say if the word in bold is either an adjective or if the word in bold is an adverb. Jane sang joyfully, joyfully, sang joyfully. So is this an adjective or is it an adverb? So joyfully. sang. Sang is a verb, right? So how did she sing or how did she sang? Joyfully, which means that joyfully is an adverb. It tells us about the verb, which is Jane sang joyfully. So sang joyfully. Kylie always wears red shoes. Red shoes. So what kind of shoes? Right? Meaning that shoes, it's a noun. And red, it's the question that is being asked, what kind of shoes? So which means that this is an adjective. All right, if you now look at the next one, look at number 3. I asked hesitantly. Asked. Is asked a noun or is asked a verb? If I ask, does it mean that I'm doing something? Asked. So now the question is, how did she ask or how did I ask? Hesitantly. Hesitantly asked. So asked being a verb and hesitantly telling us how we did the verb. So this is an adverb. We come to the store often. We come to the store often. Just like asking yourself, like, how often do you guys come to the store? We are regular customers, right? So often tells us when, which is an adverb. And now one last one. We barely finished our lunch. Finished. Finished is a verb, right? So barely finished is it's an adverb. All right, so that is basically our lesson on adjectives and adverbs. And we see an adjective, it tells us about the noun. An adjective, it often asks us what kind or how many. How many can either be numbers like 3 stars, 2 girls, 5 babies, right? How can tell us, for example, either red shoes, beautiful dress, beautiful smile, right? Then we have an adjective, adverb, and an adverb it tells us about the verb. A verb is an action or doing word. So some of the adverbs will either ask us how, or it will tell us when, or it will tell us where. And most of the adverbs that tells us how, they end in ly. So grade 3, this is the end of our lesson on adjectives and adverbs. Thank you very much for joining our class. You should have a good day further. Goodbye.